He may not look like it, but I got some interesting observations, insights, analysis on the new Pope. We're gonna talk about it. All right. So let me get to it this time. All right. You see this brother? All right. He may not look like it, but the new Pope might just be black. According to experts, he's got Creole roots coming out of New Orleans and Haitian ancestry through his mama's side.
This new Pope, his lineage is he's Creole.
Yes.
Yeah.
White smoke, black Pope.
Right.
Glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace to people of good will. I wanted to offer a very brief note on the topic of black popes. Now, I don't particularly care about this topic, but I thought this might be an opportunity to put out a couple of methodological points, right? To at least put them on the record for future reference, right? So as you saw at the beginning of this video, Marc Lamont Hill was among multiple people who had noted that the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, who was just elected this past week, might be quote-unquote black, whatever that means. And the New York Times had an interesting article on the new Pope's lineage, which I'll link to in the description. Now, unsurprisingly, some of the people in the live chat for Marc Lamont Hill's show were disagreeing with him. And I say that's unsurprising because the reality is that there is no single universally agreed upon definition of quote-unquote black. An anecdote that I've touched on in the past, which illustrates this, in my opinion, is from when the April 2005 issue of Essence magazine declared Mariah Carey to be, quote, America's most misunderstood black woman, end quote. And that caption or that title set off a debate among readers of that periodical, with some sincerely arguing that Mariah Carey is obviously black, and others just as sincerely arguing that she's obviously not black, with each side in that disagreement feeling that the opposing side is just ignorant. You see, many people feel like their intuitive sense of the definition of black is the definition of that term, but the reality is that the precise borders or parameters of that term are not agreed upon, and that's why people are often surprised to encounter someone else who has a different notion of what the parameters of that are. You know, some feel that this is a morphological designation, which renders lineage irrelevant, right? But others feel that it is a reference to lineage, which would make outward appearance irrelevant. And aside from that, a number of people who have commented on the question of whether Pope Leo XIV might be the first black pope objected that Popes Victor, Miltiades, and Gelasius I were black popes from antiquity. And that in itself relates to another debate which has been floating around the internet for decades. You see, Popes Victor, Miltiades, and Gelasius I were all from North Africa, and some feel that that basically demonstrates them to be quote-unquote black. But some have taken a different view and objected that just because they're from Africa, that doesn't mean they were black. Now, I have to confess that the whole debate is difficult for me to take seriously. You see, on the one hand, yes, there were lots of people in ancient North Africa who would fit various Americans' notions of quote-unquote not black, whatever that means. But so too, there were lots of people on both sides of the Mediterranean who would fit various American notions of quote-unquote black, whatever that means. So yes, Popes Victor, Miltiades, and or Gelasius I could have been quote-unquote black. One or more of them could have been quote-unquote black, and so too various other popes, aside from those three, could have been quote-unquote black, depending on the definition of black. And while it would be right to say that we don't have photos of various ancient popes, so we don't know for certain, the reality is that because these terms are so poorly defined, even if we did have photos of them, that still might not settle the question, right? The fact that people have plenty of images of Pope Leo XIV and Mariah Carey and various other folks, yet still disagree, shows that photos of these ancient popes might not settle any such debate, right? And here's another point to make. If Pope Leo XIV and Mariah Carey are black, then it would seem that Pope Victor, Pope Miltiades, and Pope Gelasius I were almost certainly black as well. In other words, for folks who want to insist that Popes Victor, Miltiades, and Gelasius I were quote-unquote not black, right? It raises the question, are you saying they were necessarily not even as quote-unquote black as Pope Leo XIV and Mariah Carey? You know, or to put that differently, some of those who wish to deny that those African popes were quote-unquote black imagine them to instead have had morphologies like those of the current Pope and Mariah Carey. But that only takes us back to the point that even that sort of look falls within the range of some people's notion of quote-unquote black. And a notion of black, which includes Pope Leo XIV and Mariah Carey, could easily encompass a great many popes, including many European popes, right? How many dozens of the various Southern European popes, the Spanish popes and Italian popes and Portuguese popes, how many of them might have easily fit this notion of black, right? So for those who want to muse on the question of how many black popes there might have been, while the honest answer is we simply don't know, a preliminary asterisk would have to read, it depends on one's definition of quote-unquote black. Now, on a humorous closing note, the Catholic writer E. Michael Jones, who has long had disdain for people obsessing over these quote-unquote racial categories, weighed in on this question by joking that the first black pope was actually St. Ignatius of Loyola. And for those who might not catch the pun, San Ignacio de Loyola was never pope, but he was the founder and first head of the Jesuit order, and many have long called the head of the Jesuit order the quote-unquote black pope. But with that, I'll close this video here. As always, I welcome any comments, questions, or criticisms, so feel free to share your thoughts, whether positive or negative, and God bless.